The lucky ones get to say that.
I declare the Council Agenda Briefing Forum of the 19th of September 2023 held in Council Chambers at Level 2, 388 Hay Street, open at 5:31 p.m. Welcome everyone. On behalf of the City of Subiaco, I acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people as the traditional custodians of the area. We recognise their cultural connection to land waterways of Subiaco and their continuing contribution to our city. Attendances. We've got one apology from Councillor Burns, two councillors on leave of absence, that's Councillor Kosovich and Councillor Hammersley, and the remaining elected members are all present in person. And we've got our entire executive leadership team here as well to advise us as necessary. Are there any disclosures of interest this evening? Nope, that's good. There's no approved deputations, and I won't make any announcements this evening. We'll get straight into the officer reports. Beginning with C1, number 55 Bedford Avenue, Subiaco. We've got an officer recommendation for approval, and I'll take any questions on that now. Councillor Powell.
Yes, thank you. And through you, Mayor. Look, I'm a little bit confused by the tables. There seems to have been a change in the way they're being presented, and I'm really finding it difficult when I look at like the open space assessment table to decide whether the percentage is for or against, and it simply says after it design principle, and it says the same thing I think for height and that sort of stuff. So I mean, what is the open space? Does it, does it comply? And previously, I think in the assessment part, we would have, sort of a variation where it would describe what the variation was. And I found that much easier to understand than the way the tables are at the moment, I've got to say. So how does it meet open space? What is the height of the building? If you can answer those two first off, please.
Director, Development Services.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Powell, and through you, Mayor. So as part of conversations with elected members, we ran a planning review, and the way that we presented information was discussed with elected members, and we've updated our reports to make it a bit more clear that there's two pathways of assessment under the R code. So there's a deemed to comply pathway. So if a standard meets that requirement, that is called deemed to comply and approval is not required. And if it doesn't mean that it's not approvable or it can't be approved. It just means that there needs to be a design principle assessment. So previously we used to denote what the variation is to that deemed to comply requirement, but that's probably not technically correct. So all the information is still in the reports with regard to open space assessment. So for example, on the left-hand column, it says the deemed to comply is 149.5 metres squared. So that's in the column. And what they're proposing is 135 metres squared, or 45%. So you could denote that there is a variation there, if you'd like to call it that, of 5%. And it's similar with the building height assessment. So the deemed to comply is 3.6 metres, but it's up to 6 metres, and that's in the other column. So all the information is there. It's just presented in a slightly different way.
Thank you. I do appreciate that. However, to me, this is a more obscure way. It's more difficult to actually figure out what the real figures are. Would it be too much difficulty to actually put in, sort of what the variation is, and then, as it was before, and then say design principle, and perhaps even mention which design principle?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. Look, we can take on that feedback. We always get feedback from elected members on the way the reports are presented. So the design principle is actually referenced in the attached document. So to ensure that we don't have too much information in the council report, so they're a little bit easier to read, a lot of that technical detailed assessment is in that is in the attachment for the design principle assessment.
Any other questions? Okay, I think we can move on from C1 then. C2, a tender for the receiving and processing of curbside commingled recycling. Any questions on the officer recommendation? Councillor De Vries.
Yeah, through you, Mayor. Just a quick question regarding the awarding to Cleanaway, which is I'm not questioning that, but the second tender offerer was the WMRC, I believe, and I'm just wondering why there were two tenders from them. One was an alternate tender. I'm just kind of seeking clarification on what that means.
That'd be the South Metro Regional Council.
Yeah, sorry, the South I'm sorry, not WMRC, SMRC. So what's the alternate tender mean? Sorry.
Director Technical Services.
Thank you, and for you, Presiding Member. So, as with any tenders, we require anyone who's submitting to conform to the requirements of the tender. So typically, they have to provide qualitative and quantitative feedback in the submission. But they're also invited to provide an alternative which can differ from that structure. So I believe in this case, they had differed the basket of goods, which affected the pricing structure. So there was a difference there. And that's what they provide as their alternative tender.
Any other questions on C2? Councillor Stroud.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This might be something to keep in mind for the future, since we're becoming so conscious of carbon dioxide offsets, which is relevant to the following item. I'm interested in and perhaps it will come under one of the sets of implications and considerations, but do the staff know by diverting this co-mingling recycling from landfill, what the benefits of our carbon dioxide offsets would be? And I don't expect an answer on that now. Perhaps you can come to me during the week, and whether staff would consider in the future now in our agendas where it's relevant that they actually put that in. Thank you.
Director Technical Services.
For you, Presiding Member, I take your point, Councillor Stroud. Probably it's worth mentioning that the subject of this report is not changing how we manage the waste. So our practice as far as what gets collected in the yellow top bins is recycled in the same manner. So whichever contract we were to go with, that would not change as far as the overall carbon emissions and impact. So we haven't listed it because the sector effectively there's no change, but if you'd like, we can provide some estimation as far as that is concerned.
It's already included as well in our calculations, right?
Yes, so, and the CEO's just reminded me that it's also included as part of our overall calculations for corporate emissions. So it's something that's already accounted for. So I can give you that information if you'd like out of session. Yeah. Yes.
Any other questions on C2? We will move on to C3 then. Transition of light fleet to electrical vehicles and installation of chargers. Any questions on C3? Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Mayor. Maybe I missed it in the report. Just wondered what the estimated or anticipated life of the new charging stations are.
Director Technical Services.
Thank you, and for you, Presiding Member. So the life for the chargers we're looking at is at least 10 years, so they have a 10-year warranty, sir.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you. Thank you for that answer. If they're where they're going to be installed at 3 locations, if they need to be moved, can that be relatively easily done, and we wouldn't be recreating the wheel to move them because we've got some things in flux, some of our premises? Thank you.
For you, Presiding Member, so yes, that is something that's quite easily done, and actually we've had recent experience where 241 we actually had similar sort of charges that were relocated.
Any other questions on C3? Councillor Stroud.
Yes, with 1 foot out the door, these questions might be very popular with the staff. The CEO's already had a hint at them from talking to him the last couple of days, including with the CEO of LGIS, because I was interested with insurance. So here goes. We are looking to spend nearly $1 million on these because there's allocated monies from our budget of $644,500, and then we add the amount of money that is being asked here, and we also add the charges. Now, there's reference to 17 vehicles. What I'd like to know is, one of my first questions is that our full fleet? And what are these vehicles used for? I was quite surprised about the number of 17. So that's my first question. Thank you.
Director of Technical Services.
Thank you. So it's not our full light fleet. Effectively, this would cover all but our light utility vehicles that we have for operational purposes within my directorate, and also 3 other vehicles in the light fleet. But effectively, it's the lion's share of our light vehicles, which are based predominantly at this location and also at Bishop Street and used for day-to-day operations for office-based staff.
Thank you. Through you, Matt, again. So I'm surprised there are so many cars. So how many are in our fleet?
Thank you. So I might have to, in the interest of time, I might come back to you for that one, just to save a bit of time, if you wanted to ask you subsequent questions.
Okay, I'll keep going if I may. So the 17 vehicles we're talking about, are they replacing fuel cars or hybrid cars?
Thank you, for Presiding Member. So the majority of these vehicles that we're proposing are currently hybrids. So most of them are hybrid vehicles.
Okay, thank you. Now, moving down to the FBT table on page 20, you suggest a considerable saving in FBT between 17 EVs and 17 hybrids. But I understand that the FBT benefit of hybrids is the same as EVs, and it doesn't change until 2025. Is that correct?
Thank you, for Presiding Member. So the current changes to taxation allows vehicles under the luxury vehicle tax that are EVs to be excluded from FBT, and that's what's been applied in this report.
My understanding is that they are both treated as the same, and that the difference isn't going to kick in until 2025. So there's actually no saving until 2025. That's okay if you want to come back to me on that one. That was my research on it, my layman's research.
So just confirming that's one we'll take on notice and receive some advice to later on? Yep, okay, we'll take it on notice.
Thank you. Now, the next question I've got is about insurance, which I was asking the CEO of LGIS, and from my understanding is they haven't really got on top of this yet. And we are seeing on the news EVs blowing up, and at Mascot Airport fairly recently, an EV took out a number of cars around it as well. So to me, this suggests that there could be an increased insurance premium on the vehicles. I don't know if that's been addressed in this report, and I also wonder about insurance for the chargers. And is that something too you'd like to come back to me on?
So I can certainly talk to the vehicle component, and I don't know if, without notice, Joel can chip in as far as our insurance coverage for on our premises and property. But certainly, it's been factored into our financials as far as the insurance costs for it through our insurer LJS, and so that's been factored in the financials. And it's not a considerable difference between the two.
Mr. Guest, can you comment on the insurance coverage in respect of the charges at all?
Through you, ma'am. I don't know that I can. It's not something that sits within my team's remit, but having some recent experience with the fire at the admin centre, I would suspect that the charge is probably a fixture to the building, and as a result would be covered under our building and contents policy. So I'm speaking not as an expert, but just as someone who's had a bit of experience. I suspect they would be covered as contents.
Excellent. Councillor Stroud.
Thank you. So therefore that suggests there's not going to be an additional cost to them. Is that what you're suggesting?
That's correct, yes.
My next question is, why so many recharges? Because there's about, what was it, 12 EV chargers for 17 vehicles.
So really that's just to cover the 3 sites that we've nominated, that being the Bishop Street site, Lords and the library. It covers the 17 vehicles that are proposed, but it also covers the current EVs that we have in our fleet. So it will assist the charging of those. And what is also being done and not subject to this report because it's within the budget is we're also replacing all our range of vehicles with EVs. So again, the Bishop Street charges would go towards the charging of that. So it really just covers the current and future demands that we foresee in the short term for our EVs and just managing it across the sites where we have them based primarily.
Thank you, if I may keep going. Look, back to the number of vehicles, I just realised I think we've fully understood. These are all service vehicles, are they? Like Rangers vehicles. Are any of these staff cars? Thank you.
So to clarify, so these are staff cars predominantly. Like I said, the Rangers vehicles is a separate budget item, and that's being done just at an office level because that's within the current year's budget. So this is primarily vehicles that are based at our work sites that are used by office staff for attending site visits, managing contractors, etc.
Are there vehicles that are taken home by staff? Or they left on site?
So the majority of these are taken home, and hence that's why a lot of them are eligible and incur FBT currently. And maybe just to get back to your earlier question as far as tax exemption, so what you're referring to as far as 2025 actually applies to plug-in hybrids where that'll be, I think, effectively phased out. So that's not really applicable because we don't have any of those in our fleet.
Further questions, Councillor Stroud?
Yes, thank you. Another question is, now, from my understanding from reading and even coming back from the recent conference, is that the jury is out on the resale of EV vehicles. And in fact, there's a concern because of deteriorations in batteries and the heavy cost of replacement of batteries and so on. So how does the staff come to those conclusions of anticipated resale in that financial graph, when it seems like the industry is not even confident because apparently the resale market has not yet been tested on EV vehicles?
Thank you. So while I guess it would be it's a fair statement to say that it's not a mature market and that it's still fairly fledgling as far as the second-hand EV market, we have applied usual principles for depreciation of vehicles. We've also brought into consideration, we have disposed of some EVs, so we were a fairly early adopter, so we've brought in that knowledge as far as what's been done there and also available resale costs. So we've drawn upon whatever data we have as far as the resale market currently and applied that to our working out. Yeah. And the financials that are within the report are based upon a 2-year turnaround, which, given all these vehicles would have a 5-year manufacturer's warranty and actually an 8-year battery warranty, there's a good prospects as far as resale and certainty for the second-hand market.
Also, the report refers to a higher purchase price of EVs. So is that's in comparison to the hybrids that we have been buying. So what sort of percentage high? It just refers to a high percentage price, however that is offset. But I'm just curious about what is the higher purchase price? Is it like 20% more, 5%, 50% more? What? Appreciate this might be difficult because we're probably applying all this to different vehicles as suggested in the report, but you guys said it, a higher purchase price, so I'm just interested in what it is.
So approximately across the vehicles, if you take an average, it's about 18% more expensive upfront as far as the cost, the purchase price of the vehicles. As described in Table 1, which is included in that first column.
Thank you. I think it's all right. You can come back to me on that one if you like, if you haven't quite got it. And then I think this might be my final question, which is, no, it might be my second final. The reference to 31.5 tonnes of CO2, is that from replacing fuel cars? So that's the sort of saving, 31.5 tonnes of CO2, I assume in total for the 17 vehicles per annum. Is that okay? And is that for replacing fuel cars or hybrids?
Yep, so that's showing going from our current state, which we calculate every year as part of our carbon neutral accounting. So that's our current fleet of 17 vehicles, which are predominantly hybrid, and transitioning them all to electric vehicles. So that would be the resultant change in emissions per year, which is 31.5 tonnes of CO2 equivalent.
Thank you, and I think this is my final one. It probably relates to the purchase plan agreement, which I have to admit I'm not on top of. But there's a statement that says less carbon if from renewable electricity. And my question, what's the guarantee that all the electricity that is required to fuel these cars is renewable? Because, you know, it's not necessarily, it's intermittent, all these systems of turbines and solar. We're still very much relying on gas and other fuels. So how do you draw that conclusion? Thank you.
So that's calculated based upon the sites where the EV charge is either currently present or proposed to be installed. So all of those sites, which are subject to that agreement that you mentioned, all have effectively green power. So that is certified carbon neutral power that doesn't come into our overall inventory as far as carbon emissions goes for the for the city, in accordance with the Walga contract.
So we're not actually generating our own solar power, are we, to fuel these cars? We're offsetting it by some wind turbines somewhere else or something, are we? Is that what that purchase power plan does? Because to me it just seems we should really be taking some responsibility ourselves and fueling our own cars with our own solar power. And I just wonder, even with that massive roof that we have at Lord's, why we aren't going more down that way, particularly with electric chargers placed there. So if staff can make a comment on that, thank you.
So yes, 2 of the 3 sites that we have nominated do have solar already on them. So both the library and Lord's already do have fairly moderate sized systems. So certainly if they're getting charged during daytime, that will come into play. Whatever's not covered by the on-site generation would be covered by the contract, which, like you say, is generated by wind power through this purchasing agreement.
If I could just add, though, that the agreement by which a lot of local governments are in through Walga essentially, I suppose, resulted in that wind farm being created, because the wind farm wouldn't have been there if they didn't have the contracts to support the wind power. So ultimately, while we're physically not putting wind on our sites, the fact that we've signed up in a collective agreement as such with that amount of power across the state has meant that that's led to the infrastructure that's been built to support our contract.
Thank you. I suppose my final question is just for a comment, and it's really about, I think we probably allocated these funds before we knew we had a big administration issue of rebuild and reconsideration and so on. And I'm just really wondering about the prudence of this sort of money being spent in this way to meet carbon offsets, which are a few years off, and whether is this something that could be delayed for a year or two before I appreciate that the monies have been allocated, but we move monies around. We're very capable of moving monies around, and particularly in this time of a big spend ahead of us. So, thank you.
So I might just have a comment to that. So one of, I guess, the real benefits of what we're proposing here is that it will result in a considerable saving to the city. So while you're quite right that there'll be upfront costs, which we're proposing to come out of the plant reserve, which has capacity right now, once that is realised, we expect to save approximately $252,000 per annum across these vehicles. As it's mentioned in the report, the charges themselves would be paid off by the use in just over a year. And so beyond that, obviously we're realising further savings going on, and it's a similar sort of situation with our fleet as we transition across. So I take your point as far as prudence of spending now, given we've got a few big capital decisions, but in the scheme of things, this is a fairly small contribution and would realise an ongoing saving to the city.
I appreciate, thank you through you, Mayor, I appreciate that the charges, it will take a year to get a return. How long will it take on the EV fleet of 17?
Thank you for your presiding member. So again, there's a few assumptions here, but if all these vehicles received around the same time, it would take about just over a year to cover that cost.
You got 15,000 a vehicle straight away as soon as it's purchased.
Yeah. So, sorry. So, as is noted in the table 1 of the report, we've got effectively $15,000 worth of savings per annum per vehicle as soon as you purchase.
Any, Rick, Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Mayor. You mentioned that we already have EVs. How many EVs do we have, and will we have with these extra 17? So how much of our fleet has actually now gone to EV?
Thank you for your presiding member. I believe in the report we do mention this. I think it should be 4. So there should be, there's 4 in the fleet currently. So 2 Ranger vehicles and 2 pool vehicles.
So this will bring the number to over 20. Is that how fast are the charges that you are putting in?
So through the grant that we're hoping to utilise here, it applies for Tier 2 charges, which are 7 to 22 kilowatt charges. So they are fairly quick charges. So a full charge would be a matter of a few hours.
So I suppose what I'm trying to get to, will the charging stations be sufficient for a fleet of over 20 vehicles, or will people perhaps who are taking the vehicles home still be charging you at home?
So we anticipate the majority of charging could be catered for on site. So that's how we've calculated the number and the location of the charges.
And one final one, and I think this, I know that this is very close to what Councillor Stroud was asking, but it essentially comes in, where are we getting the power from to generate the electricity for these vehicles? I think you might have mentioned that it's got something to do with the contestable power arrangement or power agreement. Can you just explain how that actually works, please?
Okay, so the CEO did touch on this, so I'll just, I guess, explain it further. You're quite right. All sites that we're proposing to have charges are contestable sites. So they're ones that can go into the market and we can seek financial arrangements beyond just synergy. What was done through the Wolga Power Purchasing Agreement, which Council agreed to just over almost 2 years ago, actually, was to have all these sites in question, which is about 8 of them across the city, which are our main energy consuming sites, party to this agreement. And like the CEO has mentioned, that was effectively that you aggregated all these power users across the state or across local governments, and there was an agreement reached whereby a site was developed with wind generation, which would generate and put into the grid, and that equivalent offsets which are avoided would then be apportioned to each city that's party to that agreement. So effectively offsetting your emissions for that. So it was effectively green power. That's how each of the sites is supplied currently.
So essentially synergy is no part of this deal at all?
That's quite right. So it's just really using Western Power's grid, but it's a separate party. It's a contract separate from synergy.
Any final questions on C3?
I do have one more.
Councillor Stroud.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I do have one more that I remember I picked up recently at the RAC breakfast, where I went to on behalf of the Mayor and the City. Apparently, because of the weight of the batteries, EVs are heavier cars, and they wear the tyres more than your normal car. And I just wondered if we had any concept of that at all, and what that would mean, how frequently tyres would be changed. And if you need to come back to me on that one, that That I quite understand. Thank you.
I can speak to that because obviously we do have real hand experience as far as we've already got 4 EVs in the fleet, and we've had some in the fleet for, I think, going on 5 years now. So we've got experience that, to be honest, there's not a huge difference as far as tyre wear. We've not had to replace tyres any more frequently than our other either standard combustion or hybrid vehicles. So it's fairly negligible.
Final call for questions on C3. I think we're finished. C4, financial statements for the month ending 31 August 2023. Any questions on those, councillors? Nope. Okay, next week there will be some confidential business, but we won't be discussing that in a public forum this evening. So I'll therefore declare this agenda briefing forum of the 19th of September 2023 closed at 6:07 p.m. Thank you, councillors, and thank you, staff.